Tomas is on vacation, and I'm Patricia Hewitt. I work in the History Library with Tomas. Our speaker, Stephen K. Madsen, is the author of Exploring Desert Stone, John and Macomb's 1859 expedition to the canyon lands of the Colorado. And he just told me his book is a top pick for Southwest Books of the Year, best reading for 2010 from the Arizona State Historical Society. And the book is for sale in the Palace bookshop. He's also the co-author of In Search of the Spanish Trail, Santa Fe to Los Angeles, 1829 to 1948, and Boating on the Upper Colorado and the Navigational History of Bear River. He's written numerous articles for the Old Spanish Trail Association and the Utah Heritage Foundation. Stephen served for several years as the historian of Washington, D.C.'s National Independence Day Festival and Parade. He and his wife Adrian have 3 children, and Stephen now works for the Salt Lake County Granite School District. Please welcome me, help me welcome.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Tomas Yane and his fine staff here at the Palace of the Governor's Chávez Library for organizing and scheduling this event. And also thanks to my daughter Belinda for helping me with the layout and design of this Prezi presentation I'm going to show you today. Now Prezi's pretty fancy stuff. It's not like your standard PowerPoint. So it's going to zoom in and zoom out. I was going to bring some motion sickness medication for you, but I forgot all about it. So I'd also like to thank my daughter Heather for her valuable suggestions in the making of this presentation. Now, this is a significant day. 152 years ago today, I want you to be aware of this, the Macomb expedition launched itself right from outside this window, right here in Santa Fe, to the canyonlands of the Colorado River. And I think that's pretty remarkable. On July 13th, 1859, 150 years ago today. And I want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that at that time, according to the diaries we have, his men packed their mules right along East Palace Avenue here. Okay, and then marched the train out of Santa Fe at 10 a.m., precisely 10 a.m. They marched the train. Shortly afterward, Governor Abraham Rencher, right here at the Palace of the Governors, along with his wife, treated each of the men, Macomb's assistants that were still behind here, with a glass of wine, presumably right here at the Palace of the Governors. Macomb and his men then dined over at the Fondant. At 2 p.m., Macomb and his team mounted their walking mules and departed Santa Fe for a 2.5-month survey of the Four Corners region. Most likely they traveled up Washington Avenue, right outside this window, and Bishop's Lodge Road, and continued over the Santa Fe to Taos Road towards San Juan Pueblo, or as we know today, Oceahuina. A lot of action that day was, again, right outside this window. Up to 65 men, including an escort of 40 soldiers and 1 officer, made up the party. Growing tensions among the various native groups in the region, particularly the Navajo and Ute tribes, threatened to spark widespread conflict, armed conflict, in fact. In the aftermath of the Utah War, the War Department had directed the U.S. Army Corps of Topographical Engineers to survey the region and find new approaches to Utah in the event of future conflicts with its inhabitants. So, from Santa Fe, Captain Macomb would plot a course into Utah's canyon country and attempt to penetrate that sandstone wilderness we're all familiar with. If you've all looked on Google Earth or you've been to Canyonlands National Park, you know what I'm talking about. That sandstone wilderness near the confluence of the Green and Colorado rivers. Using historical images and recent photographs, I hope to introduce you to the story of the Macomb expedition, which is the subject of my book, Exploring Desert Stone, published last year by Utah State University Press. It's full of illustrations, many of which you'll see in this presentation. Now, in the front of the room, I have a copy of the published map that resulted from the expedition. It's this one right over here. Okay, and this is a facsimile that is really quite interesting. If you look at this map, it has some really interesting features. We'll talk more about this later. I also have up here an original copy of the Macomb report, now a rare book. Okay, you're welcome to come up and peruse the book and the map after the presentation. And I have some cotton gloves up here for those of you who wish to see the book up close and personal. So it's a rare book. Now, some of the themes here. We're going to talk about these people, places, and things here in this wordle image, and introduce you to many of the people and places that are shown on that image. Now examine for a moment some of those subjects. Okay, let's start with the key players of the expedition. Okay, obviously the most important person here is the leader of the expedition, who was a 48-year-old career officer and member of the elite corps of topographical engineers, Captain John N. Macomb. His letters to his wife, pictured here, and to his military commanders give us helpful information about the expedition. He wrote to his wife, Nanny, that he felt overpowered and anxious about the expedition. He believed that there was little prospect of discovering anything worth knowing, he stated. But Dr. Newberry, who was the scientist on the expedition, says the country must be explored and the government ought to pay for the expense. So I've given myself less anxiety on the subject of late. He was particularly upset when his petition to the military department of New Mexico for a 300-soldier escort to accompany the expedition was reduced to 40 men. He responded in great disgust. With the help from a military insider who had the ear of the Secretary of War, Macomb would be released from his assignment in New Mexico following his expedition, which was a great relief for him. He wrote his wife that without the homeward tendency of the expedition, the whole thing would be utterly distasteful to me. Thankfully, Nanny Macomb had the foresight to preserve her husband's correspondence, now in the Library of Congress. Macomb resided in privileged conditions. He resided in Bishop Laney's quarters adjacent to the old parish church, shown in this sketch right here by Charles H. DeMott. The present St. Francis Cathedral right here rests on the site of the former adobe structures. You may recall that Willa Cather based her fictional work, Death Comes for the Archbishop, on Bishop Laney. Laney enjoyed showing off his flower garden, and at one point shared a bouquet of delicate flowers with Macomb's men. On Corpus Christi Sunday, one of the party noted that the day was observed by the Catholics with much form. That morning, the host was carried from shrine to shrine by the bishop and his assistants, followed by the girls from the convent, and men in the rear shooting blank cartridges to scare the devil. On one occasion, Bishop Laney invited Macomb to accompany him on an excursion from Santa Fe to Captain John Pope's artesian well site to see the boring in progress. Pope was drilling a number of water wells near Galisteo, several miles south of here. Macomb joked, "So we are going with a Roman Catholic bishop to see a pope, if not the pope." 5 civil employees accompanied the survey. Perhaps the most important one was Dr. John S. Newberry, who had already served with distinction in 2 Western expeditions, the Abbott Williamson and Ives expeditions, and would serve as the physician, scientist, and artist for the Macomb expedition. He later became a leading scientist of the 19th century. He wrote more than 200 scientific papers during his lifetime. here is the 54-foot iron stern wheeler that Newberry had taken to explore the Colorado River with Lieutenant Joseph C. Ives. Newberry ultimately became the first scientist to study the Grand Canyon from its river base, from the bottom of the gorge. Another civil employee who accompanied the Macomb expedition was Charles H. DeMock. He wrote the topographical memoir, drew the field maps, made 2 sets of pencil sketches, and kept a diary. Before the expedition, he had sketched Edgar Allan Poe's gravestone, which is the only known illustration of Poe's original headstone. Macomb's civil employees stayed at the Fonda, or Exchange Hotel, a 1-story hostelry at the end of the Santa Fe Trail. The present hotel, shown here, was built in 1922. DeMock considered the hotel back then a den of iniquity, where fighting, drinking, gambling, and prostitution abounded within its walls. He wrote, "To get drunk, gamble, and fornicate seems absolutely the only duties of 4/5 of those who board here at the Fonda." He was horrified by the advances in the complicated forms of sinning as are here to be found. "Plain sin is esteemed puerile and contemptible," he wrote. Longing for home one night, DeMock retired for bed, blue and miserable. DeMock was horribly homesick throughout his time in New Mexico, longing for his wife and infant son. He wrote frequent letters to Emmy, his wife, and impatiently waited for mail stages to arrive with news from home. Cogswell commanded the expedition's military escort. At the start of the survey, Lieutenant Cogswell entertained the men with his punning proclivity. Over time, however, they grew to dislike him immensely. His excessive drinking and his early morning revelries, often at 4 a.m., upset the group. DeMock complained at one point, all in ill humor at being waked so early. Albert H. Pfeiffer was the Indian agent that accompanied the Macomb expedition into the heartland of the Utes. He helped orchestrate several meetings among the various tribes. Now, most of the documents of the Macomb expedition can be found at the College of William and Mary, the Library of Congress, the National Archives, and at the Virginia Historical Society. In Richmond, we find DeMock's diary and pencil sketches, including those he drew of American Indians. Thanks to Margaret Jones Parrott, the owner of the DeMock papers, DeMock's sketches are now published for the world to see. Pictured here is Tamooch, a Capote Ute leader who accompanied the Macomb expedition into Ute territory. At the upper left here is an illustration of a San Juan Pueblo boy. At the Library of Congress, we have Macomb's letters to his wife and DeMock's topographical memoir, which are published in the book Exploring Desert Stone. At the National Archives, we have Newberry's abridged diary, Macomb's letters to his commanders, and the field maps. In addition to archival resources, we have the gritty reality of field work. Pictured here is my car, mired in the bottomless sands of Canyon Largo, one of the longest dry washes in the entire world. I had consulted with the nearby federal agency in Bloomfield about the route, and they assured me that it was safe and passable for my vehicle. And as I left, I thought I heard them laughing in the background. On more than one occasion, these oilmen rescued my car and towed it to firmer ground. Field work also included jeeping the route of Macomb and camping along the trail. Also, we hiked into remote locations where Google Earth and GPS are not reliable. Now, I think some of you people may think, well, GPS can carry me anywhere. It just doesn't work, folks. Some of those cattle trails out here in this wilderness look like major highways on your GPS unit. Okay? And Google Earth is pathetic out here. Okay? I just want that to be made clear. Now, I just want to also point out, you won't find cell phone service or Wi-Fi here either. Okay. My brother, who accompanied me here on the left, he was hiking on a broken leg at the time, unbeknownst to both of us. We thought he was just merely nursing a sprain, but his condition, we found out later, was a broken leg. This 40 to 50 foot drop-off near Macomb's destination created a huge obstacle for the man. And let me go back to Google Earth again. Because when you zoom in on Google Earth, now we're going to try to do that today, but we couldn't get good access to the internet here in this room. So I wanted you to be aware that when you go into Google Earth and you zoom down into this Indian Creek Canyon, and you follow your little hand tool along the course, the wash there of Little Creek Canyon, and you follow it all the way down to its confluence with the Colorado, you will note very slight differences in elevation, just almost minuscule. Okay, 2 or 3 feet here, maybe 5 feet, but not a 50-foot drop-off. Google Earth does not show that. This is what stopped Macomb in his tracks. He had all these mules, okay, a mule train with him, and they were trying to reach the confluence here and then make their way to reach the actual river and then make their way to the confluence. So he gets to this point and he's stymied. But he has 3 explorers with him that won't give up. One is Newberry, the other is DeMock, and then the sergeant, Cogswell. And so leaving Macomb behind, 3 of those explorers ultimately climbed Newberry Butte here to gain a vantage point overlooking the area near the junction of the Green and Colorado rivers. They found, quote, innumerable canyons running in every direction, ramified, deep, dark, and ragged. The vertical sandstone walls lining the Colorado River effectively blocked further travel. Newberry wrote that the torn landscape was impassable to everything but the winged bird. Now, allow me to quote from my book, on page 77, not that book. He said that the Grand Canyon, now keep in mind, I'm quoting Newberry, I'm sorry, who had been to the floor of the Grand Canyon. He said the Grand Canyon had far less variety and beauty of detail than this. He's on top looking across into Canyonlands National Park. His eye swept over an area of some 50 miles in diameter. Not a particle of vegetation was anywhere discernible. Nothing but bare and barren rocks of rich and varied colors shimmering in the sunlight. Scattered over the plain were thousands of fantastically formed buttes, pyramids, domes, towers, columns, spires, of every conceivable form and size. Among these, by far, the most remarkable was the forest of Gothic spires, he said. His was the first written description of the Needles area in present-day Canyonlands National Park. He struggled to capture its essence. Nothing in nature or in art offers a parallel, he said, to these singular objects, but some idea of their appearance may be gained by imagining the island of New York, thickly set with spires like that of Trinity Church, but many of them full twice its height. One purpose of the Macomb expedition was to fill a large blank space on the official map of the United States. I don't know if you can see that clearly from where you're seated, but right here, sweeping across the map, it says region unexplored scientifically. And all around here are mistakes. Okay, just all kinds of mistakes. The information that the United States government got from traders and from different explorers that have been out here, it's just loaded with mistakes. Okay, so it's really interesting that this map was published in 1858, just 1 year before Macomb launched his expedition to the Stone Wilderness in the Southwest. In addition to these blank spaces that appeared on frontier maps at the time, maps were ridiculed with numerous representations of mythical natural features. One map in particular showed the junction of the Green and Colorado rivers below the junction of the San Juan and Colorado rivers, and both river junctions appeared deeply inside New Mexico. Another purpose of the expedition was to map the old Spanish Trail. Now, that's a tough thing to do. He did over 200 miles of mapping of the trail. I spent 18 years with Professor C. Gregory Crampton at the University of Utah trying to put a project to bed that entailed mapping the old Spanish Trail all the way from Santa Fe to Los Angeles, California. 18 years. That's as long as the trail was in use during its heyday. We must have been absolutely crazy to launch that kind of an expedition ourselves. But we did it, and we finally put it to sleep. Now, I wanted to mention that it says here, I've got written down here that Macomb's men would follow more than 200 miles, and we noted, of the main route, and several miles of the Armijo or southern route. Now, Armijo route principally ran through Canyon Largo, and then down into that canyon country along the Utah-Arizona border, and finally made its way to Las Vegas region, and then over to Cajon Pass and down into Los Angeles Basin. In 2002, the Old Spanish Trail became a federally recognized National Historic Trail. It is jointly administered by the National Park Service and the BLM. OSTA, the Old Spanish Trail Association, works hand in hand with these agencies to preserve and mark the historic route. This is what some of those alternate routes look like. You can see the main route from Santa Fe, swinging up here into central Utah, and then back down here through Las Vegas, and then down into the desert country of Southern California and through Cajon Pass down to San Gabriel and on into Los Angeles Plaza. The North Branch went up through Taos and Cochitopa Pass over to Grand Junction and then intersects the main route at Green River, Utah. The Armijo route kind of broke off just beyond Abiquiu and then followed again up into the San Juan River country, and then basically paralleling the border between Arizona and Utah to reach Las Vegas and intersect the main trail. It rained more than 50 days on the expedition. So whenever clear skies appeared, Macomb engaged his men in observations, calculations, and at times demanding survey work. They took barometer readings, made careful triangulations, and mapped the expedition's course. Their survey instruments included chronometers, barometers, thermometers, sextants, compasses, spyglasses, chains, scales, rulers, and a telescope, and several other instruments that I don't have time to elaborate on. On several occasions, rain delayed their work. Sitting at their tables for breakfast one day, DeMock wrote, "Big drops began to rattle a roll call on our tin plates and cups. The men donned their India rubber coats and," he says, "got quite comfortably through, though an infusion of rainwater does not improve tea, nor wetting add to the edibility of biscuit," he said. In addition to the rain that they encountered, thunderstorms were often a problem. In fact, at one point in the region around Horse Lake, a thunderbolt hit the cliffs above their camp and rock tumbled to the ground. They also faced near drownings and loss of supplies at dangerous river crossings, as well as the hazards of scorpions and rattlesnakes around their campsites. This 1860 map of the Territory and Military Department of Utah shows Macomb's outward and homeward routes. From Santa Fe, their route led northward to Abiquiu. So here would be Santa Fe down here. Okay, they're going to make their way up here to Abiquiu, right in here. And along the Rio Ciboya, which is right in here, along the Rio Ciboya, they left the old Spanish Trail and headed north to Pagosa Springs. So they just zipped up here into Pagosa Springs. They then veered westward and re-entered the Spanish Trail just over in here somewhere to reach the Red Rock country of southern Utah. From there they continued northwest, west and northwest up here into the canyon country of central Utah. And then they reached the Colorado River, which is right in here. And on their homeward march, they marched southward past the Abajos, right in there, down to the San Juan River there, and they reached the San Juan near today's Bluff, Utah. From that point, they marched upstream 120 miles, okay, passing by the Four Corners, where the states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, passing through today's Farmington, New Mexico area. Let's see where we're at right here. About, let's see, where's Four Corners, right? Have I lost my track here? Okay, right down in here. And then they continued south through Canyon Largo, which is right here, crossed the Continental Divide right about in here somewhere, and then made their way to the pueblos of Jemez and Santo Domingo, right down here along this Nacimiento Mountain, made their way back through that Pueblo country back to Santa Fe over here. Now, Macomb commissioned this man here, Frederick Wilhelm von Egloffstein. Now that's a mouthful, folks. A Prussian aristocrat, to draw the map of the region explored by the expedition. Egloffstein was the father of half-tone engraving, and he introduced Americans to a new way of visualizing geography. It was a radical departure from the past, from those old two-dimensional hatchet maps of the 19th century. Torn between completing his map work and joining the Civil War effort, Egloffstein helped organize a regiment of New York volunteers, went into battle, was later severely wounded. These events delayed the map's completion. To capitalize on the gold mining operations in the West, however, Egloffstein was able to publish his map in 1864. And again, we have a facsimile copy right here for you to peruse later on. So in 1864, that's 5 years before John Wesley Powell explored the Colorado River. In 1869, Powell launched his famous voyage of discovery down the Colorado. And Newberry resented the news story that nothing is known of the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. He reminded readers of Denver's Daily Rocky Mountain News that the Ives expedition had entered the mouth, quote, entered the mouth of the Big Canyon and afterward explored its source 200 miles further by land, or to the junction of the Little Colorado. He also informed the public that he had served as, quote, geologist to another expedition in 1859, Captain Macomb's, which explored the country around the junction of the Grand and Green Rivers and traversed the valley of the San Juan, end of quote. Powell must have known about Egloffstein's map. Historian Carl Wheat informs us that the Egloffstein map was one of the most beautiful maps ever published by the United States Army. Another source states that the 3D realism of the map was unmatched during the period. It is the first detailed, accurate map of the Four Corners region. This shaded relief map represents an area of 12,000 square miles at a scale of 12 miles to 1 inch. Now, the National Park Service funded the development of the facsimile of this same Egloffstein map for inclusion in my book, Exploring Desert Stone. An unexpected outcome of the expedition was the important discovery of dinosaur fossils along the route. Newberry discovered the site of the first sauropod dinosaur bones found in the Western Hemisphere. The sauropod, a giant, long-necked, long-tailed plant eater from the Jurassic period, may be the ancestor of all North American sauropods. Newberry found the bones dubbed Dystrophius via Emily directly on the Old Spanish Trail, he says here. So if you could read his handwriting, it says directly on the Old Spanish Trail. Newberry and his team, although handicapped by inadequate tools, feverishly extricated from their stone encasement 200 pounds of the fossil bones, which Edward Cope later described and illustrated in the Wheeler Survey publications. The original bone fossils are in the Smithsonian Institution. The fossil bones were discovered in a sandstone cliff near Macomb's Camp 26, 250 feet above the canyon floor. Fran and Turby Barnes of Moab, Utah, shown here, rediscovered the site of the dinosaur quarry in 1987. The Smithsonian website reports that these were the first, as you see here, the first significant dinosaur fossils added to their collections. Now, what follows next are the images of Macomb's route of travel. The color lithographs based on sketches by Newberry and the pencil sketches by Demock will illustrate the fabulous landscapes they explored. I will also show my photographs of those same vistas. East Palace Avenue. Let's start here. It's not quite a vista, but we'll start here. The starting point of the expedition. This is a sketch by Charles H. Demock. Notice the similarities between the two images. Camel Rock is located in Tesuque, Pueblo. Today it rests next to a major freeway and opposite a huge casino. Demock thought the rock looked like a Scotchman. So if you look at this profile here, it has this kind of a Scotchman look about it. Now that's eroded away from yesteryear, but you can see similarities there. Abiquiu Peak, or Cerro de Pedernal, near Abiquiu, New Mexico. Of course, this became the subject of many of Georgia O'Keeffe's famous paintings. This balanced rock can be found north of Abiquiu. We visited the site just yesterday, and it's still intact, folks. The Cachucha, or Cap, is near Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. Locals call it Orphan Rock. Horse Lake, or Laguna de los Caballos. Newberry reported that it got its name from the drowning of some traders' horses which were swamped in its margins in an effort to cross it. This is located today on the Hickory Apache Reservation. Again, a thunderstorm, as I mentioned earlier, struck the cliffs nearby while they were encamped there, and it was around this camp that the men killed several rattlesnakes. My Apache guide, Lambert Callado, helped me locate their campsite near the Continental Divide. Now, beyond this point, after the Macomb expedition crossed the 37th parallel into today's Colorado, they had entered the eastern limits of Utah Territory, formed in 1850 and had ceded to Colorado in 1861. Pagosa Hot Spring in southern Colorado. Macomb's party described it as a 40 by 50 foot diameter spring of unfathomable depth. Its temperature measured 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The spring, they said, was impregnated with sulfur and magnesia. Today, the commercial development of the spring has greatly altered the site. Piedra Parada, or Chimney Rock. This is located 17 miles west of Pagosa Springs, Colorado, along U.S. Highway 160. The Rio Florida. Macomb pitched his tents here on August 4th on the west bank of the Rio Florida, several miles southeast of Durango. Just beyond their camp here, they re-entered the path of the old Spanish Trail. The La Plata River Valley. This is near today's Hesperus, Colorado. Newberry described the mountain paradise here. At this location, the men enjoyed a luxurious bath in the beautifully clear La Plata River, surrounded by fine grama grass and a waste of flowers upon which we bedded, stated Newberry. He continued, the valley is exceedingly beautiful, and our camp one of the most delightful imaginable. Our tents are pitched in the shade of a cluster of gigantic pines, such as are scattered here and there, singly or in groups, over the surface of the valley, separated by meadows thickly coated with the finest grama grass. Stretching off southward, a wall of verdure, tinted with the fresh and vivid green of cottonwoods and willows, marks while it conceals the course of the sparkling stream, whose murmuring flow comes softly to the ear. On the north, the bold and lofty summits of the Sierra de la Plata look down upon us in this pure atmosphere with an apparent proximity almost startling, he wrote. Encamped here, near the base, as you see, of the La Plata Mountains in the background, these would be the La Platas here. Later, the area of rich mineral operations. The party ironically found no metallic evidence to suggest that the nearby range merited the Spanish name of Sierra de la Plata, or Silver Mountain. The Dolores River. The Spanish padres, Dominguez and Escalante, camped here in 1776. In this region, Macomb's team explored Mesa Verde to the south, but missed the celebrated ruins inside the present park. Nevertheless, they discovered extensive ancient Pueblo ruins throughout the region, within today's canyons of the Ancients National Monument, as well as rediscovering Yellow Jacket Pueblo ruins, the ruins of Aztec Ruins National Monument, as well as several ruins along the San Juan River. Casa Colorado. This is just south of Moab, Utah, and it juts up more than 200 feet above its sandstone base. It was a very famous landmark on the old Spanish Trail. At its contoured base, the expedition found tanks, or tinajas, carved into the sandstone surface. Newberry noted that it was a water supply source in dry seasons and a curious and important provision of nature. The men, he stated, found used leather kegs to gather the water from the nearby sandstone basins. Repulsed by this wild landscape, apparently because it lacked exploitable resources, Macomb wrote, I cannot conceive of a more worthless and impracticable region than the one we now found ourselves in. Well, Macomb's civil assistants disagreed vehemently. They felt that the area's appearance was so strange and beautiful as to call out exclamation and delight from our party. Newberry considered the landscape the wildest and most fantastic scenery on the surface of the globe. Now keep in mind, he had already visited the Grand Canyon. At Six Shooter Peaks, both Newberry and DeMock sketched the landscape just east of today's Canyonlands National Park. The Canyonlands area. This is another view just east of Canyonlands National Park, seen by Macomb's explorers. The magnificent Shiprock Formation, a 1,000, oh excuse me, I'm going too fast here. Church Rock, an interesting sandstone formation along US Highway 191. Now just back here you see the LaSalle Mountains in the background. Now we go to Shiprock. Magnificent Shiprock, 1,600 feet above the floor, and it was considered a massive erupted rock by the men there. They said from all points were seen by us, it has the appearance of an immense cathedral of rich umber brown color terminating in 2 spires. Of course, you can see it's now largely eroded. Demock stated, seen in the distance at midday, looming from its reflected image in the mirage, the fitness of its title is apparent. A phantom ship mirrored upon a trembling sea. Now, Canyon Largo. Throughout the 50-plus miles of Canyon Largo, Macomb's men were following the southern route of the old Spanish Trail. Here they found an abundance of petrified wood. Navajos stole 2 of their herd in retaliation for those taken from them by the Utes who were with the expedition on August 4th at the Rio Florida. The Cabazon, or Big Hand. This landmark is located in the Rio Puerco Valley, near the southern end of Nacimiento Mountain. Newberry stated that it resembles in its outline a Spanish sombrero, but it is of gigantic dimensions, being at least 1,500 feet in height. No, before reaching Santa Fe beyond this point, the Macomb expedition passed through Santo Domingo Pueblo. Demock described their encounter with the tribe when they reached the Rio Grande just opposite the Pueblo. He said, the Indians soon thronged around us, coming over the river with melons, corn, and chili to sell. One quite pretty girl sold her peppers for 37.5 cents, and offering her my ring for that amount, she tried it on, looked admirably, I can't even pronounce it today, but refused the silver. On entering the village, Macomb's men engaged in trading for moccasins and blankets. Santa Fe. Macomb arrived here at the end of September. After 2.5 months and 800 miles of travel, they had finally reached their home base. Macomb and his men were just thrilled to be back home. Demock in particular. He dashed into the city, grabbed his mail, and ran for his room in the fonda. He wrote, trembling and with heart in mouth, I broke open the letters from my wife. My eyes found too often filled with moisture to allow much progress. To me, my darling little wife has endeared herself tenfold more, if possible, by her letters and conduct during my absence. A sense of utter unworthiness overcomes me when thinking of her gentle, loving goodness and kindness to all. The Macomb Report. 16 years they waited to see this report published. So 16 years after the expedition, the U.S. government finally published the Macomb Report. Now a classic of frontier literature. Why did it take so long? Well, Civil War conditions delayed the publication. By 1876, the great surveys of Hayden, King, Wheeler, and Powell had captured the American limelight. Macomb's men never got the recognition they deserved. Today, the Macomb Report, as you see right up here on this stand, this is an original, is a rare and outrageously expensive book. The price ranges from $1,200 to $6,500 a copy. When I obtained my copy of the original report, as you see here, several years ago, the price was indeed impressive. Now, the results of the expedition. Macomb's explorers surveyed and mapped the region transected by the Old Spanish Trail and delineated its route. And for us, the historians of the Old Spanish Trail, it's wonderful that he did. They scientifically surveyed the Four Corners region. They made considerable contributions to paleontology and archaeology. And the specimens they gathered became an important part of the collections of the Smithsonian Institution. They stimulated commercial activity and facilitated settlement in the region. Finally, they laid the groundwork for future explorations and scientific studies. Thank you very much. Now, if you have any questions, yes?
You were saying that is when he got back, is when he got all his wife's letters?
Yes, this is DeMock.
And his wife was where?
She was in Baltimore.
She was in Baltimore.
In fact, that's why he drew that sketch of Edgar Allan Poe's gravestone, was there in Baltimore. And in fact, the Baltimore Society, Edgar Allan Poe Society, has that same illustration on their website. Yes?
I came in a little late, so you may have covered this, but the town of Macomb, Illinois, how does that relate to him?
I'm not sure it does relate to him. I've seen that, and I think there's another Macomb in Michigan and elsewhere, but I don't think it relates to him. Yes? Any other questions? Yes?
No, I was just curious about your comment on the shiprock, because it's Macomb, Newbury represented to look like a cathedral, and you think it's now eroded from that.
Well,
do you have any evidence of that, or was that his creation on top of it?
let's go back.
It's a wonderful representation.
Let's go back to that. Now, I'm, of course, taking this photograph from the opposite side. Okay? So if I were on the north side, looking southeasterly, that's what I would be looking at, the San Juan River here. And, of course, it's probably not that same. They've used some exaggeration here in this illustration. But yeah, it has eroded away to some degree since then. And I have, of course, a sketch that DeMock made of this same location, and it does look kind of like a cathedral from his sketch as well. So it's nice, when these two men would go out and explore, when one of the men would start to sketch, the other one would pull out his sketchbook and start sketching as well. And so we have an abundance of sketches that, several that I did not include here in this presentation that are in the book. Yes?
Do you know if the artists were using camera lucida to assist their drawing?
Yes, they did have that along with them on the expedition, and several other items that are mentioned in the book that they had with them. Yes?
In that, the picture, the last picture of Santa Fe, can you see Fort Marcy in that photograph, in that drawing?
Let's see.
On the flag.
Yes,
It's,
you see that up there on the hill, just overlooking the city.
so,
But that's kind of an exaggeration here. This, you know, this was done for the Emory report, and
oh, this wasn't,
this is not part of their.
so what year was that?
This was 1846.
Oh,
It was published in 1848 with the Emory report. Yes.
Did they have any contacts with the Native Americans, hostile or otherwise?
Well, not really hostile. They were concerned for their welfare on a few occasions, particularly over in the Canyonlands area, because they were encountering a new group of what we refer to as Shiveritz Utes over that region near the LaSalle Mountains. And they weren't quite sure what they would face with them, because they wanted to come into the valley and trade with them at night, and Macomb put a guard there to stop them from coming in until it was daylight, so they could get a good picture of how many were there and what they looked like. And then when they came into camp and Macomb offered them some tobacco, they said, well, the Americans that were here before you gave us heaps of tobacco, and they were just really put off by Macomb. And but later that subsided, and they, that evening, were able to engage in some serious horse racing and enjoy that for a little entertainment in the evening. Yes?
Did they see any of the wounds of Open Week?
No, I don't recall them seeing any of those. No. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Welcome to come up.